Hi, my name is Jordan. I am a special education teacher from the UK. I share my passion for everything communication, sensory regulation, and fun lesson ideas for my classroom of disabled pupils aged 4 to 11. Each week, I am joined by experts in the field, answering your questions and sharing our knowledge and experience working alongside our beautiful young people. Let's get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Sensory Classroom podcast. My name is Jordan. Today, I'm joined by Lelanie from Sensory Help Now. She is Dr. Lelanie Brewer, is a devoted occupational therapist with extensive experience in helping children and young people with sensory processing difficulties. She is an advanced practitioner in sensory integration, and we're going to be talking about those sensory differences today. Hello.
Hi, Jordan. Thank you for helping me. I am an OT and also a researcher. I have done this job for over 2 decades. I also have some sensory differences myself, so this is my absolute life's work and life's passion. Um, you know, I, this is just something that I feel really strongly about, that we should make the world more accessible for individuals with sensory differences. And also just the impact that sensory differences can have everyday life. And I think it's not always understood properly.
It absolutely isn't. That's so interesting that you say you've got your own sensory differences. It happens a lot in special education too. Lots of my team and loads of the teachers I know in special education also have sensory differences. I wonder what comes first though. I wonder, and you can say what happened to you. For me, I didn't realize I had sensory differences until I was working with my young people and doing my training. And then I started to reflect on my own needs and then I became aware of it. Was it the same for you?
So a bit different for me. So I was not very coordinated at school, which is a bit problematic because I grew up in the 80s in South Africa, which is very sporty, very like, gotta make the team. I hated team sports. I really struggled, didn't really, do those kind of things. And it was just really unpleasant. And, I I did learn about sensory integration when I was at uni, and I just was involved in a research project there, started working in a trust in London. But I started doing some yoga and the proprioceptive and vestibular input. I massively noticed that my balance and coordination improved a lot. So actually, as an adult, I have really been able to do sports now on my own terms that I would never have done before. The other thing is, so when I was telling my mother about my work, apparently she said when I was at nursery, the teachers used to ring her and say that I refused to do finger painting and I was being obstructive.
Interesting. Whereas actually, of course, we know now that's just avoidant. You just didn't want to get messy and you found that tap
I
sensitive.
know, I know. So those are some of the examples, but and I also see how it fluctuates with stress. So you can manage really well. Last year, when I was preparing for my PhD Viva, I went through a phase where I couldn't touch any food. So it was just my stress levels were so high that the only thing I could tolerate, and I know that it's really not very healthy, but I could only like tolerate microwave meals where I didn't have to touch any or prep anything because I physically cannot stand the texture of food prepping when I'm really stressed.
How useful is that you recognize that in yourself? Because without having the knowledge that you've got to recognize the why you're feeling like that, you could have felt really disempowered and just unsure or out of control, I suppose. Whereas just knowing why in your own body, why you're doing certain things, it kind of gives you that empowerment to kind of own that, I suppose.
Absolutely. And I think that's what I say to a lot of people. So a lot of assessments are, people say, why would you do a sensory assessment? Why would you have an autism assessment? Why would you have an ADHD assessment? But I also read a piece by the model Christine McGuinness earlier this week on her Instagram, where she was saying that she just thought she was weird. And then she had her autism and her ADHD diagnosis, and she can really she really feels like empowered. She can, she recognizes who she is. She feels at her ease with herself because before she just felt awkward. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So for everyone who's criticizing, what's the point of all these assessments? There is a point because it gives them a tool to recognize difficulties and also for people to understand what's going on. And I had a really interesting conversation with a family last week that I was working with. So the daughter was referred, but mum disclosed that she had some difficulties herself. And I was going through a sensory processing measure questionnaire with the family for the daughter. And I was asking about one of the questions was around, does your child like tread heavy? Do they stump their feet when they walk? I said, and they said, what does that mean? I said, and I gave them an example and I said, people who don't, have a good sense of body awareness to get some more proprioceptive feedback. And then the husband turned to the wife, he said, that's why you walk like an elephant. It's you. And anyway, but they laughed. They all laughed. And
Yeah.
they like, wow, this is really
This is why. Does that often happen when you're filling out forms for the young people and then the actual parents or carers are thinking, that's me, that's me?
It does actually. I have found that. So I have worked in private practice in the NHS for, as I said, I started practicing in 2000, which is I feel like, oh my goodness, it's a lifetime now. But I do find that when you explain things to people, then like the why. So there's two things. Parents recognize some of these behaviors, but then also that light bulb moment whether someone's like, that's why you do that. That's why you can't. So if your wife has tactile issues, don't leave a bunch of rubbish in the sink. Just don't.
Yeah, and that could really cause, if it's not understood, it could cause those little arguments all the time, those misunderstandings, because the person that has the sensory processing difficulty isn't meaning to do those things. They genuinely struggle with it. It is a physical thing. It's a physical processing difficulty that they have. They can't change it. Sometimes it's even subconscious. They don't even realize they're doing it. And then the people they're living with, whether it be a parent or a child or a partner or whatever, are maybe getting frustrated with that because they're not understanding that they can't control it. They think it's purposeful or lazy or any of those things. Executive function is a perfect example. My husband gets really frustrated with me because I just really struggle sometimes to get up and go. Hyperfocus is another one. He really struggles to get through to me if I'm into something. It's almost like he just doesn't exist and I could be anywhere else in the world. And it genuinely isn't on purpose. I really, 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 really cannot control these things. I wish I could. It would make life so much easier. But through understanding my own needs, he breeds more understanding of from his point of view as well, of knowing how to communicate with me, knowing what support systems I need in order to kind of navigate that together. Without that, it would just be constant arguments.
Absolutely. And, for your listeners, the teachers who have these children and young people in their classes, they really don't mean to. So this is a funny hyper-focus story for you. I'll never forget this. This is one of my top skills in life, hyper-focus. And I was 9 years old. It was before the time where you moved to different classrooms. So you were still in the same classroom, but when the lesson changed. I remember this like yesterday. And one of the few memories of my childhood that I remember in every single detail, where I finished my maths work early, asked to the teacher, I said I'm finished. There was still like another 25 minutes or so to go at least, because it was only halfway through the lesson. And teacher said, okay, go pick a shelf, go to the bookshelf, pick a book. I did. I have one of the things that I absolutely love is when I read a book, I probably engross myself more than a movie because I actually create the characters in my head. I feel like I've actually lived the story. So I really get into it. I feel like sometimes I would feel like I've seen the film, but I've actually just read the book. And I was there 9 years old reading this book. And then with a jolt, an hour later, the teacher yelled at me because the lesson had then actually gone into another lesson. I didn't know what on earth was going on. And and I didn't even know, like, I got so into this book, I had no idea that we were not having maths anymore. We were doing completely different. And I just thought,
Time blind.
I know. And I just thought, hang on, 9 years old, just, no need to yell, just check in. And,
Yeah, you're
you know,
clearly not doing it to be naughty. Yeah. And I think that's a really great point, isn't it? These children in our classes, even though it might look sometimes like hurting behaviors, sometimes it might look inappropriate, sometimes it might look rude or lazy and all of those things. It really, really isn't. They're really just trying their best to navigate the world and meet their sensory needs in their bodies, right?
Absolutely. And the other thing I have seen so often from observing PE lessons in schools is children with dyspraxia and sensory difficulties. Sit in line, follow the instructions. You're not following the instructions. It's like, yes, I know what the instructions are, but my body doesn't know how to do that.
So
And
in that situation then, I suppose, what could a teacher do differently in order to include the children with dyspraxia and sensory processing difficulties a bit better, really?
so I think if you recognize that somebody has movement difficulties, there's a few things I would recommend for PE. I would think about being flexible about how the activity is done. So, for example, let's say throwing a beanbag. Be, make it a bit closer, make the targets a bit different. Not everyone has to throw the same distance. Or if you are aware that a child's consistently not being picked for the team by their peers, because children notice these things before adults do often, just make sure that child's included, and just a bit of empathy really, in being aware that actually they can't do it. Let's try something different. You can't throw the ball, maybe roll it, or can't play tennis, try. So what we did is, I was working at a school in North London and I introduced these. Oh my goodness, do you remember the shop Woolworths? That was the thing back then on the Finchley Road where I used to work, but it doesn't exist anymore. They had these little bats with Velcro where the ball could stick to it. So I took that into the school and I said, why don't you try that? Because he's not going to miss the Velcro. The Velcro is going to stick to the bat. And that was a great success. So those are, just little things that can make the child not feel like a failure.
Yes. Adjusting your expectations or adjusting the activity or maybe adjusting the environment. Maybe it's the lights or the sounds or the echo of the hall. Maybe you do it somewhere else. There's lots of different adjustments that can be made, isn't there? I think teachers are very good at making adjustments as far as learning lessons go. Those are often very differentiated
Yeah.
very well. Adjustments in our expectations for behavior isn't so good, I think, as a whole. We expect everybody to be able to sit the same, look the same, listen the same, wait the same. And actually, that needs to be just as differentiated as the learning, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And I think that, as we said before, it's not on purpose. You don't choose to be like this. This is really something you can't control. So it's just being mindful, especially with, you know, things like Christmas and Christmas plays and all those things.
Those
Just
changes to the routine. I mean, it's the awful time of year, December, isn't it? Around
Yeah.
that
I
time.
mean, it's great for a lot of people, but 90% of autistic children have sensory differences, and in the general population, that's estimated to be 5 to 16%. So you could say that you should allow for more than a tenth of the children in your class, having sensory differences that would impact on things. So I think just being mindful of loud and unexpected noises. So for Christmas time, you can have, cards explaining what's going to happen. You can warn people of noises. Sometimes preempting is a big part of it. If it's unexpected, that could cause real difficulties. So just being mindful really that there are people in your class or in your school with those differences, and just think about that.
And the example you gave is a perfect example of you can give warning and it makes no difference to anybody else. Those that don't need the warning won't be worse off because you've given a warning. In fact, everybody wins by being given that preemptive warning that something's about to happen. Using visuals, nobody loses when you're using visuals or adaptive equipment, if they're on offer. Again, they're not going to hurt anybody. It's not going to set anybody back by having those available. It just helps the ones that need it.
Absolutely. And just the other thing that's come up a lot recently in parent consultations is school rules around going to the bathroom for young secondary school kids, because there's like, oh, they can't go to the loo, they can't, they're disruptive. And some schools even have cards, and if you use your cards, you can't go anymore. And actually, for some children with sensory differences, it's knowing that they can go when they want actually will reduce the need. But if you tell them they can't go, it actually increases their anxiety and they'll probably need to go more.
So interesting. That's so interesting. Would these children be using the toilet as a need for a movement break or interoception needs? Maybe they're less aware of when they need to go. What kind of is happening there? Why might they need to go a bit more?
It's a combination for the people I've worked with. It's some interoceptive, some needing the movement break. If it's a movement break thing, I have spoken with a parent recently who's managed to finally get her school to they had a rota for a class helper, and the teachers noticed that the week that this child was the class helper, her I hate to say the word behavior, but it's like it was really positive. The child responded really well. So they've not actually realized it's like they still need to have a helper. They can't have her as a helper every week because they need to give everyone in the class a chance, but they're really actually thinking of ways to get her to do more things just as
She
a
obviously likes that sense of responsibility, sense of ownership, maybe sense of control. It probably boosts her self-esteem. It gives her movement breaks. It's probably a bit of weight because she's probably carrying things around.
exactly, and that's what we thought. It's all of that. So, and that's nice. And it's not disruptive. And what's interesting is if you do give children that movement break, they are actually more productive when they get back to their desk because sometimes people think, oh no, I can't do that because he's behind or is a bit slow. But actually, so this particular child, funny enough, they were always saying in earlier years, she's not finishing her work, she's not finishing her work. And actually, since they started to implement some of these sensory strategies, which are actually just, I like to call them common sense strategies in a way.
It's us because we're in that bubble, right? But if for people that don't know this stuff, maybe it isn't that obvious. Maybe, you need to be told this stuff. So that's what this podcast is about. That's
I know.
fine.
Anyway, so that was just something that made a massive change. It's almost like so I would almost say put your fears aside, like thinking it's not going to be the end of the world if you do your PE session a bit differently. It's not going to be the end of the world if the child who doesn't like getting glue or paint on their hands does a different craft activity. It's going to be fine. Nothing's going to, the ceiling's not going to fall in. Everyone's going to have a great day. And um, also, in terms of lunch, maybe think about the child who can't handle the dinner hall. Maybe send them in a minute or two before the others so they can carry the tray, get their food before it gets absolutely mental.
Yeah, and also if the noise slowly builds and the busyness slowly builds when you're already in place, it can be a lot less overwhelming than walking in and it's already loud and busy and echoey and all of those things, can't it?
Absolutely. And one of the problems is that children with sensory differences or motor difficulties are often, sometimes the last to get out of the class for various reasons. And actually, as you say, if they get in first, that will make a huge difference.
Yeah, and if then yes, it might mean they miss the last minute of the lesson, but then if they're regulated then through lunch, then it means that they'll be more regulated for the afternoon lesson and they've only missed a minute. It's not a
Oh.
big ask, is it?
No, absolutely. And I think in the end of the day, if you have a calmer child who's regulated and able to focus and feels good in themselves for the rest of the day, then that's a win, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can all agree there. So we've spoken about school a little bit and how to help children at school. There's also lots of things that parents will be finding at home that would be listening. Things like meeting basic needs, hygiene needs, for example, can be really difficult for these sensory avoidant children. What kind of strategies would you suggest there around, I don't know, teeth brushing, for example?
So I'm not going to go into the full kind of breakdown of that. On our sensory help on our website, so we are a not-for-profit site. And we have some free courses on toothbrushing, getting dressed, getting squeaky clean. But one of the things, some of the obvious things is looking at oral sensitivity, what kind of toothbrush, what kind of toothpaste. For some people, it could be that I worked with someone that couldn't cope with mint toothpaste, but then you just changed to a different toothpaste and that made
Yeah,
all
so it's about individualizing it, isn't it? And
exactly.
experiment. That's brilliant that you've got those resources though. I know so many parents and teachers that would love those resources. We're doing an all about me topic this term and that would be perfect. So I will definitely check that out.
And The other thing as well is that I say to parents, like, they ask, so what is the one magic thing we can do every day? And I say proprioception, heavy work, because your proprioceptive system is the magic tool that overrides all your senses when you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed. So if you're struggling to get dressed in the morning, struggling with personal care, starting with some more press ups, doing some deep pressure activities before can really help regulate your nervous system. And then, it's a bit easier to face some of these tasks.
Okay, so you said wall press ups, chair press ups. Is there anything else that we could do that doesn't really need many resources that they might be able to just
Um,
start straight away?
yoga, downward dog. We've got some uh, anything that's really heavy work for your muscles. I suggested to another parent they have a monkey bar in the hallway, just hanging off and just doing some hanging on the bar. Really nice proprioceptive feedback. If you're swinging, it gives the vestibular linear input. That's really calming and organizing. But in terms of no money, and no resources, something that's completely free is any pressure that gives feedback to the joints, pushing, pulling, carrying. So getting your child to carry the laundry basket downstairs, moving the furniture around, if you need a sofa move, all of those things can be helpful.
And that push motion is really great, isn't it?
And that's why I also say if you're at the airport and you're about to go on a long flight, get your child to drag the suitcase. It's actually really good and it will help settle their nervous system.
That's a great tip. I love that. And that's really great to know that you can't ever get too much of it. You
No,
can't ever be overstimulated with proprioception.
absolutely. It's safe for everyone and you can't, it's really something that people respond so well to. I remember once I was working in a clinic in London and a family that I worked with were about to get on a long haul flight to the US. So they stopped by the clinic en route to Heathrow
Yeah.
and they just did an hour of jumping and crashing and lots of proprioceptive exercise and lots of deep pressure. And mom sent me an email when they got to the other side to say it was the best flight they ever had.
I bet it was. And great before bedtime as well. I can imagine if you've got children that struggle to settle for bed, doing it feels counterproductive getting them to do lots of pushing and press ups and monkey bars before bed, but it really does calm, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And then there's other things as well, depending on the person's sensory preferences. So obviously, some children do better with lights that are dim and calm and other, that's where you start working with somebody and really ask them what their sensory preferences are. Some children, they are very oversensitive when it comes to specific tastes. And then you get the other extreme where children don't register enough sensory input, so everything tastes bland and boring to them because
They need
they're
like spices and
I know. And this is really one for you in the classroom to think about as well. There are children who are under responsive to sensory input. They're the ones who might appear like slumping on their chair, not being engaged. They might look completely bored, but there's just not enough stimuli in the environment to get them going. And, for those children as well, jumping, moving, having a bit of a shake about, doing something interesting can get their senses back on track for them to have enough sensory stimuli so they can engage as well.
it's about being really vigilant, isn't it? And really looking around the room, and being curious. Or they're jumping and fidgeting, maybe they need this. They're slumping, maybe they need this, and kind of working it out that way. But if in doubt, deep pressure.
And yes, yeah, absolutely. And also just thinking about the child's personality and their interests as well. And that's another kind of fun way to incorporate their sensory kind of needs. And something that works always really well is thinking of, you've got somebody who loves racing cars and I love train and I always kind of theme my sensory activities around that. So this and our scooter boards, you cannot do enough with scooter boards if you're a PE teacher.
Yeah, well, we have lots of fun with scooter boards. We're scooter boarding between every lesson, actually. It's lovely vibration, I find. So we do it outside on the playground on the concrete, and we have a skipping rope attached to the front of it through the hole. So we're pulling the scooter board along, and they're sitting on it. And not only are they getting the vestibular because we're going round in circles, but they're also getting the vibration as well. And then obviously visual because they're outside and we've got the dappled light. So there's so many different things, especially for those seeking children that have a bigger cup to fill in to meet their sensory needs. Scooter boards are brilliant.
And those with poor fine motor control going prone on the scooter board on their tummies and building that shoulder strength and stability because you're not ready for writing if you don't have, your upper body strength, right? And the scooter board's great for that.
Absolutely. And then those that feel overwhelmed, so those that aren't seeking those things at all, they are completely over responsive to these things. I wouldn't use a scooter board. They would even struggle to maybe even bend down to get that. Their vestibular, they don't like bending down. They don't like sitting back. They're really hesitant to do that. They're hesitant to touch messy things. Maybe they're avoidant of the lights. Maybe, yeah, avoidant of mess. These kind of children, it looks completely different, doesn't it? And then you need to do lots of different things with those.
Um,
Yeah.
but with those children, though, you could try and get them to pull one of their friends.
Love that. Yeah. Why not work together? I love that.
No, absolutely. The whole thing about sensory differences is we're all different and we all process sensory information differently. So that's the thing with sensory strategies. It's definitely not one size fits all. And that's why it's really I would say the first step is to look out for the signs, the person that you're working with or your family member, and then just really working with what they love and what their preferences are. And that will make all the difference.
I love that. What Because we all have sensors, don't we? And we're all registering these all of the time. And we're all moderating our own bodies in order to meet these. Some of us are doing it better than others. What is the threshold of that? If we're all sensory beings, how do we know if what we're experiencing is just our body moderating itself, or us understanding that and moderating, or it being a sensory difference?
So for me, I kind of define that we all process sensory information differently. The re It becomes problematic when that sensory difference impacts on your ability to engage in an everyday activity or engage in something that you have to do or want to do. So, for example, I worked with a client last week. It's going to be her birthday in November. Every year, she has breaks a mental breakdown on her birthday. The parents say she wants this party. She has all these ideas, and then every day birthday party all ends in tears because it's too much. So for some children, they can get overwhelmed, anxious, but it's not going to, cause that level of disruption. So I think sensory differences are when we generally, even though we would like to do it differently. Also, for example, I've been to Tesco this morning. I just quickly ran in, got a few things. It was noisy, but I was able to let it not disrupt what I needed to get to and pay for my food and get out of there. Someone whose sensory differences that impact on their ability to go to the supermarket will be so distracted or so bothered by the lights that they won't be able to get the food they need, just run out and then just actually can't cope with physically going in. So I think, again, I think that can vary with how stressed you are as well, because I think, it fluctuates. But I think I define sensory differences really needing help for that when it can't cope with what you need to do.
Yeah, so it's the impact on your daily life, and also the exhaustion or energy it takes in order to mask, in order to cope. Because I suppose lots of the people that I'm seeing in mainstream actually can't cope in those situations, but they've taught themselves strategies to mask, to hold it all in order to cope for that short amount of time that they can do. And then they absolutely fall apart. That also is a sensory difference because it takes so much energy in order to cope with what other people find quite easy to do.
Absolutely. And that's where you get the analogy of children coming home and the exploding Coke bottle, to some people describe it, because the whole day was like, you got to sit still, you got to listen, you got to look at the board, you need to pick up your pen, you need to write within the lines, and then you get home and you just can't. You've maxed out on the amount of time that you can do that. Or the same for people who go to social events. You just come home and you're just exhausted. You just want to hibernate. In fact, so many of the children I work with say that school holidays, their children don't want to leave their house because they are so
Exhausted.
tired. Yeah, they can't cope. And the parents are like, come on, you need to do something. And the child's like, no. No. So it's very common for the children that I work with to spend the first week of school holidays in their pajamas and refuse going out.
Like they just need that respite time.
I know. And you know what? If the child's happy and the parent can work from home or just it's just how it is. It's not something that I would say is, oh, you need to, panic, get your child out the door. Actually, they need that time.
I have a question for you. I was researching on before this chat what the reasons behind the sensory differences are, and I came up with three things, and I wanted to know if they're accurate or not.
Yeah, sure.
First one was they could be autistic. Lots of, like you said, there's a high percentage of people that are autistic that have these sensory processing difficulties. The next one was they could have low muscle tone, so maybe they need to do more in order to get that feedback from their muscle tone. And the other one was they could be premature, maybe born before 36 weeks. It's maybe underdeveloped. Are these things that you are research? Is that accurate?
Yeah, those are some of the things. Sensory differences is a lot to do with just how your brain processes wires sensory information. So for some, there's absolutely no reason for, particular. And you can have sensory differences without being autistic, without being premature, without having those. The muscle tone one is I see muscle tone difficulties often in people with sensory differences, but not all people with sensory differences have
Yeah.
low muscle tone and vice versa. But yeah, that there is something to be said for that. And hypermobility as well. And then there's other conditions like Ehlers-Danlos loss for the hypermobility, which is where people have really lax joints, and that's to do with the reason why people with hypermobility have poor differences with sensory processing is because the message isn't going through to the proprioceptive connectors as much. So think about a shower head, right? And it's blocked and the holes are like stuck up and the information's it's like the water's not completely going through. So it's a bit like the filter is not quite
So would they need more in order to feel that
um
impact?
so the only thing is with certain medical conditions though, and this is where you need to check with the child's. So somebody with severe hypermobility that, Ehlers-Danlos where children are prone to injuries and can really actually, tear a joint, dislocate a joint if they're not careful. You have to work with a child's physiotherapist, but in terms of they'll be working around strengthening the joints and then progress, activities, but things that are safe as well. But for most children who, slumping in their chair, but you can get away with things like scooter board activities, a lot of prone on their tummy activities, a lot of hanging, climbing are all things that can really help.
That is so helpful. Obviously, it's individualized. Of course it is. And I think that's kind of the point of this, isn't it? Is, yes, these general things might be helpful, but ultimately you need to seek professional support. Your website is full of free resources all about this topic. It's sensoryhelpnow.org if you're listening and you want to check it out. Um, it's a fantastic nonprofit resource that we should all be accessing. I think that's amazing that you have got that accessible because so many teachers and parents are either on the waiting list for an occupational therapist or there isn't a sensory trained one available is often what I hear. I heard that yesterday. So having that resource just for something to do whilst you're waiting is a fantastic resource. So thank you for sharing that.
You're very welcome.
And thank you so much for being here today. This really is a passion project of mine, this podcast. It really is about making these experts accessible for anybody that is interested in learning more. And I really appreciate your time sharing your expertise on this amazing topic today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.